There is a moment, and you may have already lived it, where you do everything right and nothing moves. You wake up before the world does. You deny yourself the things you love. You construct a life of rigid rules and silent suffering, convinced that somewhere, somehow, the universe is watching and keeping score, that your pain is currency, that your sacrifice will eventually be redeemed. And then you wait, and the money doesn't come. The relationship doesn't appear. The version of yourself you've been bleeding for remains just out of reach, close enough to torture you, far enough to never arrive. So you conclude that you're not trying hard enough, and you add more weight to an already breaking back. What if that conclusion is the most dangerous lie ever told about human potential? What if everything you've been taught about discipline, sacrifice, and spiritual practice has been fundamentally, structurally, heartbreakingly wrong? Not slightly off. Not missing a few details. Wrong at the root. Here's what nobody has ever said to you directly. The ancient practices that were designed to unlock extraordinary human power were never about suffering. They were never about punishment. They were never about a cosmic transaction where pain is the price and reward is the product. Every civilization that ever produced genuinely transformed human beings, the Vedic sages of India, the mystery schools of ancient Greece, the temple priests of Egypt, the desert hermits of the Christian tradition, the Sufi orders of Persia, every single one of them discovered the same secret, independently, without contact with each other, across thousands of years. And that secret has almost nothing to do with what you've been practicing. What they found was not a religion. It was not a philosophy. It was a technology. A precise, reproducible, extraordinarily powerful technology for concentrating the one resource that determines everything in a human life and directing it with surgical accuracy toward whatever you have chosen to create. And it produces results that the modern world has no language for. That technology has a name, and by the end of what you're about to watch, you will understand it. Not as a concept, not as an idea, but as something you can feel in your body and begin to use tomorrow morning. But I want to say something to you first, before we go any further. If you've been suffering in the name of growth, if you've been white-knuckling your way through discipline that leaves you empty instead of alive, I want you to know that what you've been doing required real courage, real commitment. The desire behind it is not wrong, only the map was broken. And today you get a new one. If this is already touching something real in you, if you feel that particular recognition of a truth you've always suspected but never heard spoken clearly, take a second right now and let me know. Like this video and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, your city, the time, the exact minute you pressed play. There is something powerful about naming the moment a shift begins. Watch this until the very end, not because I'm asking you to, but because what's waiting in the final section, 3 specific protocols drawn directly from these ancient traditions, could genuinely change the trajectory of what happens next in your life. What you are about to discover has been hidden in plain sight for 3,000 years. It's time you finally saw it whole. There is a word that has been stolen from you, not taken by force. Stolen quietly, slowly, over centuries. Redefined, distorted, and handed back to you as something almost unrecognizable. And because of that theft, millions of people are practicing a discipline that was designed to liberate them, and instead finding themselves exhausted, frustrated, and no closer to the life they are working so hard to build. The word is asceticism. And before this part is over, you will never hear it the same way again. Here is the first thing you need to understand. The ancient Greek word at the root of asceticism is askesis. And askesis does not mean suffering. It does not mean denial. It does not mean punishing the body into submission or earning spiritual rewards through pain. Askesis means training. It is the exact word the Greeks used to describe their Olympic athletes. Think about what that means. The most physically powerful, precisely conditioned human beings in the ancient world were called ascetics. Not monks, not martyrs, athletes. And when they restricted themselves before competition, refusing wine, refusing certain foods, refusing particular pleasures, they did not do it because pleasure was sinful. They did it because they understood something that most people today have completely lost. Every unconscious indulgence is a leak, and a leaking vessel cannot generate the force needed to win anything. Now picture a river, wide, slow, ancient. It spreads across a flat landscape, dividing into dozens of smaller channels, each one losing momentum, each one growing shallower, until the great river simply disappears. Not into the sea, but into mud, into stillness, into nothing. Take that same river, the exact same volume of water. Now force it through a narrow gorge. It cuts through solid rock. It moves with a violence and precision that reshapes the landscape around it. It generates enough force to power an entire city. Same water. Completely different result. The only thing that changed was concentration. This is the architecture of real asceticism. Not reduction, not becoming less, but becoming so deliberately concentrated, so precisely directed, that you are capable of things your scattered self could never touch. In Sanskrit, this concentrated inner force is called tapas, and the translation is not what you expect. It does not mean discipline. It does not mean sacrifice. Tapas means fire, heat. Because the people who developed this understanding over thousands of years of systematic inner investigation noticed something consistent and repeatable. When a human being stops hemorrhaging their vital energy through unconscious behavior, something ignites inside, not as metaphor, as actual felt internal experience, a warmth, a clarity, a kind of aliveness that other people can sense before you even open your mouth. This is the fire the mystics described. This is what every tradition was pointing toward. And this fire is what most people are accidentally extinguishing every single day, in 100 small ways they never stop to examine. Here's where it becomes personal. You snap at someone in traffic. A small leak. You eat past the point of hunger because the screen in front of you is numbing enough to make the sensation invisible. Another leak. You spend 40 minutes replaying an argument that ended 2 years ago, building the perfect response to someone who will never hear it. A leak. You scroll through content you don't care about because the silence underneath feels uncomfortable. A leak. None of these moments destroys you. But together, accumulated across days, weeks, years, they create something devastating. A person who is genuinely trying, genuinely committed, and genuinely empty. A person who cannot understand why the effort never seems to be enough. The energy was never absent. It was simply escaping through cracks that nobody taught you to see. And here is the question that should be sitting uncomfortably in your mind right now. If this principle is so fundamental, so precise, so extraordinarily effective, why did it take this long for someone to explain it clearly? Why has asceticism been handed down as a practice of suffering, of grim endurance, of white-knuckled self-denial? Because a human being who understands how to concentrate and direct their own inner fire becomes very difficult to control. A distracted, depleted, scattered person is manageable. They are easy to sell things to, easy to keep anxious, easy to keep chasing the next thing that promises to fill the gap they cannot name. A person burning with concentrated internal force is something else entirely. And this brings us to the one thing about real asceticism that almost nobody talks about. The person who practices it correctly does not become rigid, does not become joyless, does not shrink into the gray, hollow-eyed figure that the word usually conjures. They become more alive, more present, more magnetic, more genuinely themselves than they have ever been, because the energy was always there. It was never missing. It was only misdirected. Now you know what this practice actually is. You know what it was always meant to be. But knowing the definition is only the beginning. And honestly, it is the easy part. Because here is what the ancient traditions never warned you about clearly enough. There are 4 specific ways that asceticism fails. Not occasionally, consistently, predictably. And one of them is almost certainly the exact reason your own practice has not produced what you expected. What those 4 failure points are, and how they have been silently sabotaging even the most committed practitioners. That is what comes next. Most people never ask the right question. They ask how to get more discipline, how to stay consistent, how to stop failing at the practices they start. And those are not bad questions, but they are questions that live on the surface of a much deeper problem. A problem that has been hiding in plain sight for centuries, dressed in the language of virtue and self-improvement. The right question is this: why does asceticism sometimes destroy the people who practice it most seriously? Because it does. And the answer reveals something about human energy that will fundamentally change how you approach every practice you have ever tried. Let's start with the failure that is hiding inside your best intentions. The first way asceticism fails is so common, so invisible, and so perfectly disguised as real practice that most people never catch it. It is called mechanical asceticism, and it looks exactly like the real thing from the outside. You follow the rule. You skip the meal, you close the app, you wake up early, you say no to the drink. The behavior is correct. The form is perfect. But there is nobody home inside the action. You are doing it on autopilot. The same way you brush your teeth. Present in body, completely absent in awareness. And here is the brutal truth about mechanical practice. The energy that gets released by the restraint has nowhere to go. There is no conscious presence to receive it, direct it, or use it. So it dissipates, differently than before perhaps, but it still goes nowhere useful. Real asceticism is not the action. It is the awareness inside the action. It is that precise, uncomfortable moment when the impulse rises, when you feel the pull toward the phone, the food, the familiar escape, and instead of following it automatically or suppressing it with gritted teeth, you pause. You feel it fully. You remain present inside the tension, and then you choose. That gap, that small charged space between impulse and response, is where the fire is actually generated, not in the rule, in the presence. The second failure is more painful to recognize because it wears the face of success. It is what happens when ego takes over a genuine practice and quietly hollows it out from the inside. Think about someone you know, or perhaps recognize in yourself, who has been practicing something for a long time. The diet, the meditation, the early mornings, the sobriety, and somewhere along the way, the practice stopped being a tool and became an identity, a superiority, a subtle, never fully spoken belief that the discipline separates them from ordinary people. The practice that was designed to make them more open has made them more closed, more rigid, more protected behind the armor of their own virtue. This is not a character flaw. It is a predictable failure mode that every serious tradition warned about. When the ego grabs hold of asceticism, it turns liberation into another cage, just a more socially respectable one. Ask yourself honestly, do you practice because something inside you is genuinely calling you forward? Or do you practice, at least in part, because of how it makes you appear to yourself or to others? The answer matters more than any technique. The third failure is the one that surprises people most, because it sounds counterintuitive, even paradoxical. Cleansing without filling is dangerous. When you remove something from your inner life, a habit, a pattern, a way of spending time and energy, you create space, and that space will be filled. This is not philosophy. It is how energy actually works at every level of reality. If you do not consciously fill the space you have created with something of higher quality, a clear intention, a genuine aspiration, a practice of presence, then the space fills itself, with anxiety, with the mental noise you were trying to escape, with subtler versions of the same patterns you thought you had removed. This is why people fast and become more irritable, not less. Why people quit social media and find their minds more restless, not quieter. The container was emptied, but nothing was placed inside it intentionally. The fourth failure is perhaps the most honest one to confront. Many people practice asceticism in the areas where it is comfortable and visible, while completely avoiding the places where their energy is actually hemorrhaging. Someone proudly eliminates sugar from their diet, but they spend 3 hours every evening in a state of emotional numbness in front of a screen, and that costs them more vital force than any dessert ever could. Someone commits to a morning routine with precision and discipline, but their inner life is full of unresolved resentment that burns continuously, like a fire left unattended in an empty house. Real asceticism asks an uncomfortable question, not what is easy to give up, but where is your power actually going? Now stop for a moment, because what you just absorbed is not theory. This is a mirror, and if you are willing to look into it honestly, you already know which of these 4 patterns has been working against you. If this recognition is landing somewhere real inside you, if you feel the weight and the possibility of it simultaneously, write this sentence in the comments right now. I am a conduit for conscious, transformative power, not as a ritual, not as performance, as a declaration to yourself that you are ready to practice differently. And if this content is reaching something true in you, only the chosen ones will click the button on this screen, subscribe to this channel, and step into what this knowledge can actually open in a life lived with full intention. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. A friend who is working hard and wondering why nothing is moving. A family member who is suffering in the name of growth. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer another person is the right question at the right moment. Because here is what none of the 4 failures can prepare you for. Even when you avoid every single one of them. Even when your practice is conscious, humble, properly filled, and aimed at your real leaks, there are still people who do everything correctly and watch their desires remain stubbornly, mysteriously out of reach. And the reason why is something the ancient traditions understood with perfect clarity, but almost nobody talks about today. It has nothing to do with effort, nothing to do with worthiness, and everything to do with the size of something you didn't know you were carrying. That is exactly where we are going next. There is a concept so simple, so precise, and so completely absent from every modern conversation about discipline and manifestation, that when you hear it, you will immediately understand why everything you have tried has produced exactly the results it did. Not more, not less. Exactly those results. The concept is this: you can only receive what your inner vessel is currently built to hold. Think about that for a moment. Not as a spiritual idea, as a physical fact. If you take a glass and try to pour the ocean into it, the ocean does not shrink to fit the glass. The glass simply overflows, and almost everything is lost. The limitation was never the ocean. It was always the container. Most people spend their entire lives trying to force the ocean, working harder, wanting more intensely, practicing more strictly, all while the vessel they are pouring into remains exactly the same size it has always been. And then they conclude that the ocean is not real, or that they are somehow unworthy of it, or that the practice does not work. None of those conclusions are correct. The practice works. But asceticism, real, conscious, properly directed asceticism, does not primarily attract things to you. It expands the vessel that receives them. And that distinction changes everything about how you approach the work, how long you commit to it, and what you look for as evidence that it is actually producing results. Here is where it becomes genuinely uncomfortable. The size of your vessel right now is not determined by your effort. It is determined by something much deeper and much less visible. The beliefs that live below the level of conscious thought. Not the beliefs you would write down if someone asked you what you think about money, or love, or success. The beliefs that operate silently, automatically, in the background of every decision you make without realizing you are making it. Someone wants a car. Consciously, completely, genuinely. They can describe it in detail. They feel the desire as real. And underneath that desire, buried so deep they have never examined it, lives a quiet, automatic conviction. Things like that are not for people like me. Asceticism will build energy in that person. It will clarify their focus. It will create real internal momentum. And all of that momentum will hit the wall of that hidden belief and go nowhere. Not because the practice failed. Because the vessel has a structural limit that the practice alone cannot remove. This is not a reason to stop practicing. It is a reason to practice more honestly. So ask yourself right now, not in your head, but genuinely, as if the answer matters because it does. When you imagine the thing you want most already in your life, what do you feel? Not what do you think. What do you feel? Is there ease in it? A sense of natural rightness? Or is there something quieter and darker underneath? A tension, a discomfort, a whisper that says this is too much, this is not yours, this is not safe. That whisper is the wall, and the wall is the real work. But here is the part that surprises almost everyone. The vessel is not fixed. It is not a permanent condition. It is not the verdict of your past or the ceiling of your future. It is a current state. and it is responsive to exactly the kind of conscious, intentional inner work that real asceticism initiates. Every time you close a genuine leak, something expands. Every time you face an impulse with full awareness instead of automatic reaction, something grows. Every time you choose presence over escape, the container gets slightly, measurably larger. The problem is that expansion is not visible the way results are visible. You cannot photograph it. You cannot post it. You cannot measure it in 30 days and show it to someone as proof. This is why most people stop. Not because the practice stopped working, because the evidence of its working is interior and they were only looking outside. What would change for you right now if you trusted that the invisible work was real? There is another dimension to this that the ancient traditions described with remarkable consistency, and that modern psychology has arrived at independently through a completely different path. It is the problem of unfinished cycles. Every unresolved situation in your life, every relationship that ended without honest closure, every promise made and quietly abandoned, every version of yourself that you outgrew but never formally released, creates a continuous, low-level drain on your vital energy. Not because the universe is punishing you, because your own system is still running the program, still holding the file open, still dedicating processing power to something that has no path to resolution. Asceticism without addressing these open cycles is like trying to fill a vessel that has holes in the bottom. You can pour endlessly. You can practice with extraordinary discipline, and the level inside will never quite reach where it needs to be, because something is always quietly escaping. This is why the depth of the practice matters more than the duration of it. 20 days of genuine, present, honest inner work will move something that 2 years of mechanical routine cannot touch. And this brings us to the edge of something that very few people who talk about asceticism ever reach. Because once you understand the vessel, once you understand the hidden beliefs, once you start to address the open cycles, you are ready for something that completely transforms the nature of the practice itself. There are 3 distinct levels of asceticism. Most people never move beyond the first. Some discover the second. And the third, the one that the most extraordinary human beings in history accessed, operates by rules so different from what you expect that it barely resembles what we have been discussing. What those 3 levels are, and precisely how each one works, is exactly what comes next. There is a mountain in northern India where, according to records that are over 2,000 years old, a man sat in complete stillness for so long that birds built nests in his hair. Most people hear that story and think it is a metaphor. It is not. It is a description of a human being who had crossed a threshold that almost nobody in the modern world even knows exists. A threshold where the practice stops being something you do and becomes something that does you. Where the effort dissolves, not because you gave up but because you went so far through it, that you came out the other side into something that has no adequate name in any modern language. That threshold is the entrance to the 3rd level of asceticism. And to understand it, you first need to understand what separates it from the 2 levels that come before it. Because the differences are not subtle. They are as different from each other as crawling is from flying. The first level is the one you already know. It is the level of the contract, the transaction. I give up this and in return, I receive that. I suffer now, and the universe pays me later. It is built entirely on willpower, on the ego standing guard over its own desires, white-knuckling its way toward a predetermined goal. And it works. Within its limits, it genuinely works. People quit drinking and save money. People restrict their diet and lose weight. People impose discipline on their mornings and feel more productive. The first level produces real, measurable, visible results. But here is the statistic that should stop you cold. Research on long-term behavioral change consistently shows that over 90% of people who successfully change a behavior through willpower alone return to the original behavior within 2 years. Not because they are weak, not because they lack desire, but because willpower is a finite resource drawn from a finite well, and the moment the goal is reached, or the pressure lifts, or life becomes complicated enough, the well runs dry, and the old patterns rush back in to fill the space. The first level is a muscle, and every muscle has a limit. Now consider the second level. A woman in her late 30s spends years trying to build financial stability. She restricts her spending, follows every budget rule correctly, practices every first-level discipline with genuine commitment, and the money comes and then goes, comes and goes. Like a tide she can influence but never fully command. She is exhausted and cannot understand why. Then she asks a different question. Not how do I get more money, but what does money actually mean to me at the deepest level I can honestly reach? She sits with that question, really sits with it, and what surfaces slowly and uncomfortably is not an answer about finances at all. It is an image of her father, a man who worked constantly, who was never present, who equated money with absence and sacrifice, and the loss of everything that actually mattered. And somewhere beneath her conscious desire for financial stability lives a belief she never chose and never examined, that having money means losing the people you love. The moment she sees it, everything shifts, not because the belief disappears immediately, but because she now knows what she is actually working with. She is not fighting a financial problem. She is healing a story. And the asceticism that follows, the things she chooses to release, the patterns she decides to no longer feed, is aimed at something completely real. This is the second level, the level of honest inquiry, where the practice is not directed at the desire itself, but at everything that is secretly standing between you and the true version of what you want. The keyword at the first level is endurance. The keyword at the second level is honesty. And the keyword at the third level is something that the rational mind resists with every resource it has. Trust. Here is what makes the third level extraordinary, and what makes it almost impossible to explain to someone who has not touched it. At this level, the person does not abandon their desire. They do not become passive or indifferent. They do not stop working or moving or creating. They become, if anything, more active than before, but they release something specific. They release their grip on the form. There is a documented phenomenon in the psychology of peak performance called the paradox of control. Studies on elite athletes, musicians, surgeons, and chess grandmasters consistently reveal the same finding. The highest levels of performance become accessible only when the performer stops trying to control the outcome and surrenders completely to the process. The moment conscious control tightens, performance degrades. The moment it releases, something else takes over, something faster, more precise, more intelligent than the thinking mind. Athletes call it being in the zone. Psychologists call it flow. The ancient traditions called it something far more interesting. They called it becoming a channel. A channel does not generate the water that flows through it. It does not decide where the water comes from or where it ultimately goes. It simply remains open, clean, and properly directed, and allows something vastly larger than itself to move through it with full force. The third level of asceticism is the practice of becoming that channel, not through surrender in the passive sense, through such complete conscious total engagement with the present moment that the ego's need to manage the outcome simply has no more oxygen to breathe. And what flows through a person who reaches this level is something that the first level, with all its discipline and effort, cannot produce. This is the level where reality stops being something you push against and becomes something that moves with you. But knowing that 3 levels exist is not enough, and understanding them intellectually will not change a single thing in your actual life. What you need now is precise, specific, immediately applicable guidance on exactly how to enter each level, tailored not to some ideal practitioner, but to exactly where you are right now. That is what the final part of this journey delivers, and it may be the most practically valuable thing you watch this year. The philosopher Seneca wrote something almost 2,000 years ago that most people read and immediately forget, because it is too uncomfortable to hold for very long. He said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." He was not talking about distraction. He was not talking about laziness. He was talking about something far more precise, the quiet, continuous, largely invisible hemorrhaging of the one resource that cannot be recovered, borrowed, or replaced. Not money, not time in the abstract, but the living, burning, concentrated force of genuine human attention and intention. Everything we have covered in this journey points to a single, irreducible truth. The life you want is not being withheld from you by circumstance, by fate, or by forces outside your control. It is being diluted, drop by drop, by the accumulated weight of everything you give your energy to without choosing to. That ends today. If you decide it does, here is the strategic plan. Not a theory, not a philosophy. A precise, sequential map for moving from where you are right now to where you have always been capable of being. The first step is the most important one, and it is the one almost everyone skips because it feels too simple to be significant. Before you change a single behavior, before you add a single practice, before you eliminate a single habit, you sit down, alone with paper and something to write with, and you answer one question with complete undefended honesty. Where is my energy actually going? Not where you think it should be going. Not where you wish it was going. Where is it actually going today, in the specific texture of your real life? The resentments you are still feeding, the content you are consuming without intention, the conversations that drain you, the fears you are rehearsing in your mind at 2 a.m, the old wounds you return to like a tongue returning to a broken tooth. Write all of it. Every honest answer. This list is your real starting point. Everything else builds from here. The philosopher Aristotle believed that self-knowledge was not a passive achievement, but an active, ongoing discipline. He called it the foundation of all virtue, not because knowing yourself makes you good, but because without knowing yourself, every effort you make is aimed at a shadow of the real problem. Your list is the beginning of real self-knowledge. Guard it. The second step is to choose one thing from that list. Not 5. Not 3. 1. The single item that, if you stopped feeding it consciously and completely for 30 days, would free up more genuine energy than anything else on the page. You already know which one it is. The one your eyes move to first and then quickly away from. That is your practice. For 30 days, that is the gorge through which your river will begin to flow. The third step is the morning anchor. Every single morning, before the phone, before the news, before the noise of the world fills the space that belongs to you, 2 minutes. Sit, close your eyes, feel, not think. Feel the version of your life in which the thing you most deeply want is already real. Not how it arrived, not the steps that led there, just the felt reality of it already existing. Let your body register it as true. This is not wishful thinking. This is deliberate direction of freshly accumulated energy toward a specific intention. Done daily, it becomes one of the most quietly powerful practices available to a human being. The fourth step is the weekly audit. 7 days in, 10 minutes. 3 questions only. What changed around me this week that I might have dismissed as coincidence? What did I feel when I imagined my desire already fulfilled? Ease or resistance? And what story am I still telling myself that contradicts what I am trying to build? Write the answers. The act of writing externalizes what is internal and makes it workable. Carl Jung understood this with uncommon depth when he wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The audit is how you make the unconscious conscious, week by week, without drama, with simply the quiet courage of someone who has decided to see clearly. The fifth step, and the one that separates people who transform from people who merely improve, is service. One small act each day done for another person without any expectation of return. Not a grand gesture, a real one. Something that costs you something. Time, attention, energy, and is given freely. This is the practice that dismantles the ego's grip on the process more effectively than any restriction ever could, because it trains you